ones and who've been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our thoughts are with you at this difficult time. I will go straight into the agenda for this morning, and item 1 is apologies for absence. Have we received any apologies?
Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Joe Makepeace.
Thank you, Jackie. Do we have any substitute members?
There are no substitute members today.
Okay, thank you. Item 3 on the agenda is minutes of the previous meeting held on the 14th of February 2020. Can we agree those minutes as a correct record, and can I have a mover and a seconder for the minutes, please?
Happy to move that, Councillor Mark Wilkes.
Happy to second, Councillor David Boyes.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, David. Are there any matters arising? Jenny Howard?
Chair, just to confirm that the detailed scrutiny feedback of corporate overview and scrutiny members on the MTFP were contained within the report on the medium-term financial plan and budget that was considered by Council on the 26th of February 2020, Chair.
Thank you, Jenny. That takes us to item 4, declarations of interest. Do any members have declarations of interest? No, thank you. We'll move on to item 5, which is COVID-19 planning and response, the report of the corporate management team. And I'd like to bring in Terry Collins, the Chief Executive of Durham County Council, who's going to introduce the report. Over to you, Terry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and good morning, members. Good to be here to present this report. So what I would like to do this morning, Chair, is to basically look at the report that went to Cabinet on recently on the 5th of June, and talk about the executive summary at that meeting. We basically talked through the executive summary and then spent a lot of time going through the detail. But what I want to do today is going to just focus on the executive summary and the main issues that are actually contained in the report, and then the whole of the corporate management team are here to answer any questions and to as I say, to respond to any issues that arise as a result of that. So, Chair, it's what I'd like to do, I think, before I actually start talking about the report that went to the Cabinet on the 5th of June, I'd just like to give some context. I think, first of all, I think it would just be right to say that, whilst we're still in incredibly challenging times, and it is incredibly challenging times, have to remind ourselves that the virus is still around. We're still seeing infection cases, and unfortunately, we're still seeing fatalities. And like yourselves, on behalf of the corporate management team, I'd like to express our condolences to everybody who's lost loved ones during this crisis. But at the beginning of this crisis, it was particularly difficult. It was. There was an awful lot of information thrown at the organisation, and it almost felt like one day we were business as usual, and the next it was anything but business as usual, and we were having to adopt to the new ways of working, away from County Hall, away from our buildings, and away from what we would class as being normal. So, Chair, I would say, just to add context before I start, our IT has been magnificent through this process, and it has helped the council get through this period. We've had 60% of the people, of our staff within the organisation, working from home, and during that time, what we've managed to do is to maintain all the vital services, all the background services, back office services that have enabled the council to function. And this is all part of our transformation journey. I mean, we've been talking about transformation for quite a while now, and part of that move was to move to Office 365, move to Teams, to move to home working, to more flexible working, modern ways of working. And I think we did that, obviously not knowing that we were going to be facing a global pandemic. But we did that on the basis that we knew that the world was changing anyway, and we needed to adapt and adopt new ways of working. So IT has been incredible, as have our staff. Our staff have reacted incredibly well to this. And we've had, we'll go into this in the report, but we've had people assisting with work that they've never, been associated with in the past. And, as the chief executive, we're writing regular comments to regular feedback to our staff. I get, significant numbers of positive comments every week, with how people are actually reacting and how people, how positive their experiences have been, despite it being a very, very negative and a very challenging time. And indeed, we've recently done a survey of all our staff, which has confirmed that they feel like they've been supported, and also they've had the right tools, and also that they have seen the challenge for what it is, and they've reacted appropriately to it. So, as I say, before I get into the report, I'd like to stress there's been a lot happening here, particularly for the first, I'd say, probably month, 2 months of this crisis. And I'd like to thank the corporate management team and the extended management team for their work during that time, because to be honest with you, we were working 7 days a week, almost felt like 24 hours a day at the beginning of this, trying to get everything in a place, because once you actually build the structure of what the new arrangements look like, then you can actually move on from there. And I think the difficulty was to build that structure, but we did that relatively quickly. What I've tried to do, along with the corporate management team, is to ensure that kind of everybody's been informed. For regular briefings with cabinet, and they've continued throughout the process. What we tried to do is to hold fortnightly meetings with opposition group leaders, along with Simon Hennig, leader of the council. And I've also been speaking individually to opposition group leaders as well, on a weekly basis during the peak of the crisis, less frequently recently, to update them about the developments as they go. We've also been briefing our MPs, all 6 of our MPs regularly on developments, and that's been helpful in playing issues into and out of government and allowing them to raise issues on our behalf. We've been informing members of members of our team, the council staff, and some of you might have seen the most recent communication that went out yesterday to our staff, and also there's been regular member communications as well. So incredibly difficult time, but we've been trying our best to ensure that you've been informed with what's been going on, and that members have had the opportunity to feed in, whether it's through their group leaders or MPs or whatever, to so that we can actually go back and forth with information that we provided. And I feel like we've done that effectively. So, Chair, now moving to the report. The report on the 5th of June provided Cabinet with a summary of the actions that we've been taking, working with our partners to respond to COVID. And I think it's, the point 6 in that report, paragraph 6, is very correct, because we were very conscious when developing this report that the world changes so quickly that really what you write or what you say can be out of date within an hour, never mind a day. So that the world has moved on since the 5th of June. The world had moved on when we wrote the report compared to the 5th of June. And indeed, the world moves on at a pace every day. So last night we learned about the app, the fact that the app isn't going to be available, which obviously impact on our test, track and trace. And, as I said, developments are happening, at a pace. Chair, you'll be aware that, the coronavirus, which is severe acute respiratory syndrome, was identified in Wuhan, China at the end of last year. We're all aware now that the virus is highly infectious and causes respiratory illness called COVID-19. We're aware, Chair, that the virus has spread rapidly across the world, and a global pandemic by the World Health Organization was called on the 11th of March. The virus is highly infectious, and serious illness can be caused, and it's significantly affected how we live, work and play. I mean, who would have thought that we'd be doing this at the beginning of March, and we'd be in this place. So it's resulting in global adjustments to normal ways of life, travel and commerce to try and contain the spread of the virus, minimise deaths, and to ensure that COVID-19 cases do not overwhelm health and social care systems. So therefore, Chair, I think we'd all agree that this has been perhaps the greatest challenge of our lifetime. What we've had to face, and I put in my communication yesterday that hopefully we'll come to an end to this at some point, and no doubt following that we'll be talking about our experiences of this for all of our lives, because it is such a big thing. The Chair of the Council and its partners had emergency and business continuity management frameworks in place, and in fact we had an emergency exercise within the Council very early on with this. We'd got all the emergency responders together in County Hall in room 2 before before the lockdown, and actually we went through what we thought would be some of the scenarios. How would we react and so forth. And at that point, one thing was very clear to us: it wasn't a case of whether or not this would happen; it would be when it would happen and how we would deal with that. And actually, then anticipating levels of sickness, what would be the key information that we'd require, what would be the key intelligence we require, how would we work locally, regionally, nationally, what would we do if half the corporate management team went off with virus, or half the extended management team and so forth. And as I say, various scenario planning. So our business continuity plans have come into play with this, and they are something, as a chief executive, I think that something that's very, very easy to give a lower priority, but I don't think we've done that within the organisation. We've had several of the last couple of years emergency planning exercises. And one thing I've always said is that when something like this comes into play, obviously not a global pandemic, but when an emergency incident comes into play, you do need to. You don't want at that point to be checking the guidelines or the handbook. You need to be putting into practice what we've already learned, and I think that has happened. So the council, as I mentioned, has worked nationally, worked regionally and locally to protect our communities. And to support those affected by the pandemic, economically, socially, and in relation to their own physical and mental health. And mental health is a big issue here because, even though those people who haven't been affected by the virus from a physical point of view, I'm sure you'd agree that a lot of people have been affected by this mentally, and this will go on, I think, for years to come. We have to pick up the damage that's caused and have to mitigate that. So County Durham residents have observed and cooperated with national guidance while lockdown restrictions are beginning to be relaxed for many. The council will continue to support the many thousands of residents who are still shielded and still self-isolating. I'll come on to that in a minute. I've mentioned about council employees, how they've risen to the challenge. Again, I'll mention that in a minute as well, go on to that. But locally, Chair, the council has been working as part of the local resilience forum, working with the police, the fire, the university, the CCG, the health trust, and they've been meeting daily. And indeed, corporate management team was meeting daily, including Saturdays, including Sundays, for quite a period at the beginning of this, until, as I say, that we felt that we were on top of the situation. So the LRF, the local resilience forum, combination of partners all sat around the table considering strategic issues, looking at how we can actually work to mitigate the issues associated with the virus. The Council's Director of Public Health is a member of the Regional Health Strategic Group and has worked with the 3 LRFs in the region, so that's the Tees Valley LRF and also the Northumbria LRF, in addition to the County Durham LRF, which includes Darlington as well. So Darlington are still with the LRF. The LRF, just to inform members, as I say, is a body of people. It doesn't have a budget. It doesn't have a kind of a formal formal. It's not like a mini council or anything. It's a group of people that meet to discuss strategic issues, and that's what we've been doing, and that's been playing that into the other, as I said, the other regions LRFs to make sure that we're all aligned. The council's played a key leadership role regionally, supporting the LRF and regional health partnerships, and you can see from paragraph 19A to L, the sort of issues that we've been considering as part of our planning, both at a local level, at an LRF level, and at a regional level. So, Chair, if I turn now to how the council's responded to the pandemic, what I would say is I've already mentioned the overall planning arrangements, and our team of people who look after this area, which now sits in Alan Patrickson's service group, led by Kevin Edworthy, have been absolutely magnificent. In basically making sure that, first of all, that we're up to date with our planning for such an emergency, but also then, as I say, helping us through the emergency and ensuring that we're aligned. Chair, we've established a community support hub with the community and the voluntary sector to support vulnerable people affected by the virus, including those advised to shield themselves for an extended period, and offered assistance to 75,000 vulnerable people in the county, as well as 13,271 people who said they needed to help to shield from infection because they were at extreme risk of illness. And again, those two paragraphs in the report sound, fairly kind of, straightforward, but they were not straightforward at all, because, we got information coming from government actually at quite a slow rate, and we were aware of the kind of numbers within the county that we felt potentially we needed protecting, and eventually we got up to the number where we thought it should be, but initially the information was fairly slow to come through. But what we have been doing with those people is we've been, as I say, focusing on our priorities, making sure that we've got a phased approach to this to make sure that the council wasn't overwhelmed itself, but making sure that people had support, making sure they had food, making sure they had contact. And it was amazing, Chair, this week, listening to 5 Live on Tuesday as an example of the services we've been providing. Listening to Emma Glenister, a business administration apprentice who's in year 2 of her apprenticeship, talking about her role moving away from business administration to a check and chat officer, providing support and advice to vulnerable and isolated people. And the question was asked, well, you're only 20-year-old, this must have been a massive experience for you. How did you cope? And she said, I wouldn't have swapped this. This has been something I've really valued and remember all my life, that I've been able to make contact with vulnerable people and just talk and actually give assistance. And Chair, I've had many responses myself, and many examples of the benefits of this service that's been provided, from a couple of people, or from a family in Chester Street who were down to their last 2 tins of beans, that we were able to provide food and make sure that they got continued support, to an elderly lady out in the community in the Stanley area who had no close family, had no close friends, was living on her own, and was worried about the future. She was worried about the future, and she was worried about actually having the virus, and actually nobody being aware of that, and actually suffering at home. And what we were able to do through the arrangements we put in place was to put in a twice weekly call to talk about initially the virus, but then to talk about things in general, what was on TV or how good the weather was at that time. And that made a huge difference to that person's life, and it continues to, because we're still making contact. And actually we put her in touch with a support network nearby, and she now has friends locally, and that has actually resolved an issue. We've also had examples where a fence has been fixed by one of our volunteers who happened to be a carpenter, who went in and said, well, actually we shouldn't be doing this, but I'll just actually fix that while I'm here, and that's sorted out. So just so many examples of how we've managed to look after the vulnerable people. And at that point, Chair, I'd also say as well that our community groups, the volunteering groups throughout the county, have been absolutely superb. I mean, County Durham is a place, that is renowned for its community. People look after each other. People are resilient, they're hardworking, they're loyal, they're fun, but they care. They really care. And I think there have been a couple of positives that have come out of this huge negative. And one of the positives has been the way that the community generally, through its community groups, so it's through our members, through yourselves, through our volunteering, have actually worked together to look after the vulnerable throughout this crisis, and to ensure that people are protected. And I think that's a massive positive. And hopefully, when we do get through this, then something that can come out of this, and we can continue that work and hopefully build a better community as a result of that. So the Volunteer Bureau has worked tremendously well as well. And as I said, building on the community groups that we've got across the county. Chair, we've invested an additional 1.5 million via area action partnerships to support local and cross-county community responses. And members, you'll be aware that we also enabled local members to allocate member budgets more flexibly as well, that give you some local flexibility on the ground. We increased our welfare assistance scheme by a further £1 million to provide emergency financial hardship for those in crisis, using funding from the Hardships Fund, which I think for those needing that, that was a real, lifesaver. So, I think that's a fantastic thing to do. And also extended the benefits from the local council tax support scheme, utilising the hardship fund to provide an additional £300 of council tax relief, and also arranged individually with council taxpayers in financial hardship for their payments to be deferred. I mean, small amount of words, but a massive amount of impact. The topical issue has been the support we've given to care homes. I mean, we've made thousands and thousands of calls to care homes. I mean, in the middle of this and at the peak, we asked Jim Robinson to provide me some analysis as to what we were doing, and I was quite honestly, incredibly impressed that every day we were making, 2 phone calls a day to all care homes to make sure that they had PPE, to make sure that they had support, to ensure that they needed help with counselling, if they needed, some help with staffing, that those calls were being made, emails were being made, and that we had regular contact with them. And we also agreed financial help as well by agreeing a 10% funding increase for social care, and also agreeing to actually make payments up front. So recognising the pressure that they're under and trying to work with them. And you can see, Chair, in J, we supplied over 815,000 items of PPE, and PPE has been a difficult issue throughout this crisis. I mean, it really has, but we've managed to source PPE and distribute that, as effectively as we possibly can. So other things as well, the establishment of an infection inspection team, comprehensive multi-agency support to support care homes through Amanda and a team, and Jane and a team, and also supporting over 8,000 businesses with total grant payments of 94 million, which is actually higher than that now. That was an incredible achievement. I think consistently we were, in the top 3 in the country for that, which was great to see. And again, at that time, businesses really needed that help, and it kept them going. So to be able to get the money into the organisation and then to get the money out of the organisation quickly, remotely, working, virtually through our systems was an incredible achievement. And when you compare that to what else was happening elsewhere, other parts of the country, I think it just demonstrates the effectiveness of, the team there. John's team working with Paul Darby and his team did an incredible job. So also introducing immediate supplier payments, supplier relief for important vulnerable supplies and rent deferrals, providing assistance for schools. John Pearce and his team have been really proactive, in touch with schools, head teachers, governors, and also maintaining our child protection, safeguarding and social care services. An incredibly difficult thing to do, Chair, when we're having to practice social, and safe distancing. So, credit to John and his team for, maintaining that throughout this emergency, and that work continues, and being maintained. And then really, prioritising and maintaining service deliveries. As I mentioned, 60% of our workforce were working from home, but we've redeployed those where we feel we need to redeploy people, and we've maintained essential services. We always kept refuse collection going. We always kept recycling collections going. We did stop garden waste, although that was introduced at the first possible opportunity. We kept litter collection going where we could, kept grass cutting going where we could, and again we've introduced the full service back in there again once we've been able to do so, such as highways. The highways team were always operating on emergency issues, and if we'd had any issues with regard to winter, as we haven't previously in months like May, unfortunately, we were out there, we were ready to go. And also we were aware, Chair, that actually the worst time to have another emergency like a flood or severe weather was actually in the middle of a crisis. So we didn't take our eye on the ball with that one. We were constantly thinking about how we would react if we had 2 or 3 days of torrential rain, how we would cope with that, what resources we'd put into that. So Alan and his team have done a tremendous job with that. Chair, we've rapidly expanded our online service delivery, communications, online and telephone customer support using a new chat function that was introduced, so that we didn't need to have person-to-person communications. We introduced what others like Microsoft and Apple have been using, the chat function, to help people get access and then providing face-to-face or person-to-person when that was needed. Assisted with the national testing programme, and also worked on mental health related issues. So, Chair, just to at the end of my piece now, I'd say that, whilst we are constantly thinking about, kind of infection rates, the R number, although it's difficult to actually, pin down the R number because it's such a wide area that it covers. But we're also thinking about fatalities. We're monitoring our hospital capacity. We're working still as an LRF. We definitely haven't taken our eye off the ball with that, and our attention obviously clearly turns to winter as to what could happen during that period. But what we are looking at is a recovery situation. And in my communication that I sent round to everybody yesterday, I mentioned that on Monday Amy Harhoff starts within the council, and that will allow Jeff on Monday as new Director of Regeneration, Economy and Growth, and that will allow Jeff Paul to actually stand down from his interim position, and Jeff will be staying on with us until December. When the situation will be reviewed to focus on recovery, because clearly the issues around the economy, the issues around jobs, the issues around people's health and well-being, the issues around community financial well-being are going to be important issues to us going forward, and I'm sure you'd all agree with that. So we need to ensure we've got the proper plans in place and that we're actually monitoring all those arrangements and ensuring that we're aware of any developments or any potential developments that could happen in the future. So, Chair, the recommendations are detailed in paragraph 23 of the report that went to Cabinet, and as I say, the corporate management team are here to answer any questions that may be raised. But before I finish, Chair, if you don't mind, I would just like to take this opportunity as I took at Cabinet just to thank a few people. Because actually, we aren't through the emergency. We're in the emergency. We all need to remember that. I'm sure we will, and we do. But again, I would like to thank our staff for our loyalty, hard work, flexibility, the positive approach, and absolute commitment to looking after the people of County Durham. They have been magnificent. I'd like to thank our partners, the LRF, the police, the fire service, the CCG, NHS, university, the APs, community groups, voluntary groups. I could go on. County Durham has operated as one, as a true community throughout this, and it's that I think that we can be very proud of, and it typifies our county, and the people of our county are amazing. I'd like to thank our trade unions, Chair, for the help that they're giving us in dealing with some of the tricky issues that we've had, and again they've been very supportive and they've helped us throughout the emergency. I'd like to thank our community who've been for their understanding, their patience, their support, their help, and for the fantastic positive messages that we've received for our frontline staff. Yeah, I can't, kind of begin to tell you how much our teams appreciate the messages our refuse staff have received, our care workers have received, all of our frontline teams that they've received from our members of the public have appreciated them going out and doing their job, particularly during the peak times of the emergency. That is really appreciated, and I'd just like to say thank you to our community for actually those positive messages, and on behalf of our staff, they were really appreciated. I'd like to thank corporate management team and extended management team for all their effort. Everybody's put their hand up at the important time. Nobody said I can't do that meeting on a Sunday night, or I can't do that meeting on a Saturday morning. People just basically cleared the diaries, cleared their lives, and we got on with it. And lastly, Chair, I'd like to thank members, because I think members have been incredibly supportive during this time, all of you. And that again is incredibly appreciated by all the staff. And actually to know that you've been behind us during this time is been really appreciated, and we're very, very grateful for that. We're very grateful for our support we received from Cabinet. We're very grateful for the support we've received from political leaders across the piece, and we're going to need that support going forward to get through this emergency. So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Terry, for that introduction, and especially the comments right at the end. I'm sure as members of the committee we all concur with your sentiments with regards to the support that we've had as a council in working through the COVID-19 response. And I'll be making a few short comments at the end of this item once we get to that point. Members will have noticed that the report consists of a series of separate sections detailing the collective response of Durham County Council to COVID-19. And each of those separate elements will be considered in greater detail when the overview and scrutiny committees set their work programmes for the coming year. So we'll have a chance to get into more detail as we move on. Before I open this section to questions and comment from members, While you were speaking, Terry, I was informed by Dem Services that the recording right at the beginning of this item wasn't working properly, and consequently my announcement about COVID-19 and our sentiments about that wasn't accurately recorded. So for the purpose of the minutes, I would like to repeat the short statement I made on behalf of members of the board, and that is that I recognise that this has been a very challenging time for our communities, and I want to express condolences on behalf of all members of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Management Board to the families in County Durham who have lost loved ones and who have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our thoughts are with you all at this difficult time, and I'd like that recorded in the minutes. I'm going to open this item now to questions and comments from members. Initially, I have 5 members who have indicated they wish to speak, and we'll take those in turn. First up, we have Councillor Richard Bell.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Richard Bell. Just a couple of questions, comments on the finance budgetary side of things. And first of all, can I add my thanks to the excellent work that all the finance support staff have done, be it in the business support money or the welfare support payments or anything. It's been really heartening, some of the very fast turnarounds on those payments. So in a general terms, obviously we normally set our budget in February. It seems an awful long time ago now, and we would normally come back to look at it again in the last quarter. Seems very likely that at some point there'll be some sort of emergency national budget, and whatever happens nationally, it seems likely we'll have to have some sort of additional budget process. Are there any thoughts on how the council is going to manage that? I realise it's things aren't settled down yet, and just a specific example of that, the Chief Executive mentioned, fast-moving announcements. It's the extra $1 billion for educational support today. I think 2/3 of that going to head teachers, a third not. Do we know if we have any role in that? So specifically on the education money, do we know anything about that? But more generally, how does the council plan to react to the financial turbulence in the coming months? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Do we have a member of the corporate management team willing to field that question?
Yeah, can I come in there, Rob? It's John Hewitt, Corporate Director Resources. Thanks, Richard, and thanks for the positive comments about the teams and how they've addressed the financial issues, because just repeating what Terry said, it has been a significant task to get the business rate grants out and the council tax changes that we've made. It's a very good question in terms of emergency budgets, and very much, Richard, would depend on exactly what and when the government make announcements in terms of any emergency budget measures that they are proposing. I think at that point, we would assess what the impact of that would be on the council in terms of any wider implications. I would suggest that's probably going to be after August sometime in terms of announcements. So I think in terms of timescales, certainly nothing significant I wouldn't have thought until after August. In terms of our own processes, obviously we'll be doing our Q1 monitoring at the end of this month. And we'll be feeding that through to Cabinet and through to Scrutiny in terms of what the overall financial picture looks like for the council. So in general terms, Richard, I think it's very much dependent on what government announce and when and what those measures are. On the specific on education, I don't believe we've got the allocations yet. But when we've got the detail of that through, we'll certainly share that with members through the normal communication channels.
Thank you, John. And Richard, of course, raised a very valid point. Funding is going to be, it's going to be quite critical. If it wasn't before through 10 years of austerity, it's going to be now because of the, the 3 or 4 months we've had through COVID-19. And we look forward to hearing from government how funding regimes are going to work in the future, either through the future funding formula or through the fair funding formula or through the business rate retention scheme. So we'll be following that closely as a committee. The next member I have to speak is Councillor Alan Shield.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Councillor Alan Shield, representing the Ledgate and Medlemsey Division of Durham County Council. First of all, I'd like to echo the sentiments expressed by the Chief Executive and also to share with members. I was involved in an independent LGA virtual meeting on Wednesday, and I was staggered to hear from some of the members from as far afield as Barnsley, York, and even as close as Northumberland, that some of their committees, if not all of their committees, had been cancelled. There'd been no engagement with the members. They had no idea of what was happening. And when I explained in some detail what Durham County Council had done, especially with regards to Durham Together and also the COVID dashboard, I've got to tell you, they were astounded. And the chair said, I think we need to engage with Durham County Council and take the lead that they have been engaging under very difficult circumstances with their community and with their members. So just to echo the sentence again, all credit to all members of the corporate management team, the extended management team and staffs under very great, difficult circumstances. We are leading the way on this. So well done. I do have a question, and the question is regarding the money allocated to each AAP, the £100,000. Can we identify what level of scrutiny has been applied to the distribution of these funds to ensure that it has been fair and equitable? And what happens to any of the remaining monies after the COVID-19 restrictions have been lifted? Will these revert back to the council after we hopefully return to some sort of normality? Or will they be used on post-COVID-19 projects? And I declare a personal interest in this, having worked in the benefit and debt industry for some years. We all know what's coming in the future months. It's nothing less than a tsunami of issues which all of our communities and all of our residents will be suffering from. And I'll be pleased to offer my experience and my support at any time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alan. Will you be taking that one, John, or is Alan Patrickson taking it?
If I can start, Chair, and I'm sure Alan will come in on the future thoughts around distribution, just on the topic of effectively the allocations and how are we sort of analysing how they've been allocated. So there is a process in place that had to be met in terms of those grants being received, being assessed and then paid out as part of the process going forward. And obviously you'll understand we've been very busy getting the grants out and supporting members to get those grants out. That was the important thing, but there is a process in place. What we've also agreed is that internal audit will have a role in sample checking some of those applications and some of those grants paid. And again, once we get to it, in terms of process, we will be able to produce an analysis of where the grants have gone, who they've been paid to. Notwithstanding any data protection issues in amongst all that, we will have some information to share with members going forward. I think Alan Patrickson will be able to pick up the point in current discussions that are ongoing about future use of any unspent AAP funds and potentially future budgets. So I'll pass over to Alan, Chair, if that's okay for the second part.
Thank you, John. Alan?
Thanks, Chair. I think the first thing to say about the money that was allocated to AAPs is that we've had a fantastic response, as Terry was saying earlier, from the community and from members and from community groups coming forward with a fantastic range of projects to help their own communities through this coronavirus issue. From the fund that was put forward into AAPs, there's been more than 200 projects already funded. And that has managed to allocate more than £810,000. So an awful lot of that money has already been invested in community projects. Alongside that, members will be aware that there was a separate £100,000 fund put aside for cross-county projects. And again, we've had a really good take-up with that, with £40,000 of that already being allocated. And individual member budgets have also been used by some members to support coronavirus in the region of £200,000. So a huge amount of this money is already out there doing really good work in the community. What we're doing now through the AAP staff network is that we're very conscious that we want to make sure that wherever projects have been started in terms of coronavirus support, we need to understand what those projects' intentions are in the future. Some projects are now winding down just because of the phase we're in. When we were in the first phase of lockdown, there was a number of projects that started up delivering emergency food, for example, As time has gone on and supermarkets have stepped into that gap and other ways have been found, a number of those projects are now winding down because they're finding the need is no longer there for their project. So what we're doing at the minute is we're contacting every project that we funded to find out what their intention is going forward. If some of those projects need to continue their work, then we'll look to fund those projects into the future. If some of those projects are winding down, then we'll take note of that, and we know that that funding does not need to be allocated. By doing this through the rest of this month, what we're hoping to do is find the projects that need the rest of that money allocating to it, so that we can then refer back to the normal area budget process for the rest of the investment across the year. After we've continued that process, at the end of that, if there is any money left over in the coronavirus fund that we've already allocated, we would be intending to put that into the cross-county pot so that it was available for any coronavirus projects. We certainly want that money to be invested to help community support for coronavirus. But we do need to take stock at the end of our current audit process of projects, and any money will be put into, we hope, will be put into a cross-county pot, which will then be invested as and when the projects come forward.
Thank you, Alan. I've got David Boyes next.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor David Boyes, and I'd like to add my thanks and appreciation for what the council's done from over the east of the county. I suppose this is a question for Terry. As an authority, Terry, how successful do you think we've been in identifying the hard to reach groups? And I'm particularly looking at the welfare assistance scheme, but groups like the homeless, domestic violence victims, and residents without access to IT, groups who are probably more in need but don't have the wherewithal to request assistance. And just with regards to the money that was allocated to the AAPs, it seems as though there was an equal amount gone to each. But with the populations that they serve, you know, one can be like 10 times the size of the other. So was this took into account when the calculations were made? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, Chair, if I can respond to that. I think it's been clearly a challenge, this. I mean, initially, I would say that we were aware that the government were going to identify people on their list that they're considered to be vulnerable. I think the first piece of information that came through was looking like, you know, Jane will correct me if I'm wrong here, a couple of thousand people that we thought was, you know, kind of well short of what we thought that might be. Eventually, that went up to 13,000 people. You know, or people that the government identified, but through our own partnership working with, you know, CCGs, with, you know, our own intelligence of working, you know, as I say, working in partnerships, we were able to identify additional 75,000 people within our community, in addition to the 13,000 that, you know, was the final figure that government had identified as being vulnerable. So I would say that, you know, one thing about the county that is absolutely, unbeatable, I think, is its partnership arrangements. You know, whether the partner, you know, you think that the local strategic partnership that many authorities disbanded back in 2010 when there was a change of government, and actually there was a change of emphasis on that. The county actually retained ours, and therefore the police, the CCG, the health trust and so forth have continued to meet. And I think, you know, that network of partnership working around the county has enabled us to have really accurate intelligence, working with the likes of yourselves, working with AAPs, working with volunteers and community groups, working with CCGs, working with the health trust, working with the police to identify the vulnerable, and also to actually the work we did. You remember that during the crisis, having got to a stage where we'd actually identified the 75,000 people who we considered to be vulnerable and we'd made contact to them. We also then contacted everybody within the county and asked them to come forward if they needed help and assistance. So I think this has been really, really difficult, and you know, we haven't even really begun to, you know, kind of review what we've done yet, because we're still in the emergency. But I think looking back, I think to actually get to a situation where we were making contact and we had 2 hubs set up, within the county, and a team of people supporting that, led by people like Jill O'Neill, who's been fantastic, with the work there, and others have been involved with that clearly. To be making contact, to be providing food, to be providing assistance. It was a tremendous achievement, and I think that is probably as good as it gets. Now, I'm not saying that we've got nothing to learn. There will be things to learn, but I think from a standing start to get that situation was very good. I think with the AAPs, I think again it's a difficult one. One thing we wanted to do was to get some money to you, because we wanted to get money to you. At the end of the day, you're the voice, you're the eyes and ears in our communities. You are the local representatives. You know your areas better than the corporate management team does, or so we wanted, Cabinet had made that decision to get that money to you, so that you had access to those funds to make a difference locally. And we can argue about the allocations, or we can look at that, but the bottom line is we've got that money to you quickly, and you've had that money to spend. We relax we give you flexibility with regard to your member budgets, and we try to provide support on the ground. We haven't overspent them, so we're not in a situation where they've all been used. So despite wherever the allocations have been, there's been capacity there. But obviously we've got various stages for this to look after. We've been through the stage of the emergency. We're entering the stage of recovery, and hopefully not, but hopefully we're not going to enter another phase of emergency. But we know that the work as a result of COVID is going to last for a very long time. And like Councillor Shield said, I think that we do know that there's some difficult times ahead of us, and we're going to need that funding to assist with that. And I'm sure the council will be looking in the future about the actions that we need to take as a result of that. So as I say, David, it's a long answer to your question, but I think the main thing for me is we were quick to get money to the area action partnerships and to get to allow you to do things on the ground in your localities. That hopefully made a difference. I'm sure, knowing all of you will have made a difference in your communities.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Terry. I've got Jane Robinson indicating that she would like to add something to Terry's comments.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And it was just to kind of really add, there's a section in the report that talks about population health management, David. And that was a really early piece of work that was instigated through Amanda as the Director of Public Health to understand intelligence that would identify those people that are most vulnerable in our communities. And that really enabled us to kind of take the course of action that Terry's outlined. So I just wanted to flag that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jane. Mark Wilkes.
Thank you, Chair. County Councillor Mark Wilkes. I cover Framwellgate and Newton Hall electoral division. Can I first of all just say how sad I am for all those residents in our county who've lost loved ones, which includes over 24 people in my electoral division alone. But can I also say that the amount of work put in by our council officers in all departments over the last few months has been absolutely immense. And I praise all staff for their work, whilst also, let's remember, dealing with all of their own pressures of lockdown as well. Chief Exec just mentioned the things that were going on in different areas, and I'd just like to highlight one in our area, which I thought was particularly excellent way the council worked with councillors. At the start of the lockdown, I went down to Chester Street to look at the food bank down there and discovered that their distancing was just, and their space just wasn't sufficient. So we immediately commandeered our community centre. The council agreed to help with funding, and within a week of that, we also took over the leisure centre. And I would like to applaud all of the council staff for getting that sorted out so quickly. It's been invaluable in making sure that the staff and the volunteers have been safe, but also that all of those parcels have been able to get out to people across the county. I mean, this is the first meeting of Scrutiny for many months, and it is Scrutiny. So some difficult questions do need to be asked. And none, in my view, is more important than our response in this crisis to our to the problems facing our care and nursing homes. The Chief Exec outlined that a huge amount of help have been given to these homes, PPE, advice, additional funding via government and our own funding, which is outlined at paragraphs 115 to 119 in the report. Given the enormous amount of pressure they still face, I'm certain that more help is going to be needed to make sure that the sector doesn't see bankruptcies in the coming weeks and months, and perhaps officers could confirm what extra help is planned. However, I do want to raise a specific issue at scrutiny today regarding the contracts which are outlined at paragraph 118 relating to funding. And on the 15th of April, care home providers in the county were sent contracts by the council which placed them in an impossible position. If they wanted this extra funding to help them get through the crisis, they were being forced by contract into accepting from hospitals and the community, and I quote, people who have had a diagnosis of or who are recovering from COVID-19. And there was no requirement for these residents to have been tested. Indeed, I don't think at that time there was actually testing available. This contract, in effect, put every resident in care and nursing homes potentially at risk. Care home providers wrote to the council stating the contract was unacceptable and putting people's lives at risk, and they made alternative suggestions even before this date, but these were ignored. In a meeting the following week between myself, Councillor Hopgood, Councillor Martin and the heads of public health, finance, adult services and the chief executive of the council, we raised this and it was agreed it would be reviewed and a new contract was later issued. But as opposition councillors, we shouldn't have had to find out by accident from providers that such an onerous contract term was being forced on them. Because at the end of the day, a blind man on a galloping horse, every resident in the county could see that that kind of condition was unacceptable and it wasn't safe. And it also placed a lot more stress on the staff and the owners of those care homes. And to put it into context, if a government guidance was announced that you should, I don't know, that you should stay in your house when it's on fire, I don't think the council would pass on that advice. So my view is that any suggestion the council was simply following any government advice can't be accepted. Now, clearly we're still working through the crisis, but it's absolutely essential that the council learns from this mistake and from any other problems which have occurred, both within the authority, but also between the authority and other public bodies during the crisis, which is why I think for certain things we need an urgent review now to make sure that the council can reassure the public that such actions won't be repeated. And let's be fair, we're not out of the situation at the moment. There is a risk that, and we all hope we won't, that we could go into further waves. So we need to know that we're not going to see a repeat of some of those issues. So I've got 3 questions for officers, which I hope they may be able to answer today. I've previously asked for confirmation on how many patients have been released from hospital into our care homes, but I haven't had that answer yet. And I think it's important that we know that answer. Secondly, I think it's important that we know where the responsibilities lie and whether our portfolio holder was actually given a copy of the contract to show to them what the council was trying to force on care home providers before it was sent out. We need to know that our portfolio holders have the information they need and are able to check and balance what's actually happening within the council. And finally, can the senior officers just confirm today that trying to force our care home providers into accepting that contract, let's be honest, it was wrong, and just accept that the concerns of our care homes and nursing home providers were real and express perhaps some regret that that happened? Thank you, Chair.
Terry, Jane, which one would like to take that one?
Shall I come in there? Sorry. Shall I come in there first, Chair? Thank you for your questions, Councillor Wilkes. And I think firstly, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of the staff across the whole of the care sector who've responded throughout the crisis, and equally share the condolences that have been expressed by others on in this meeting. I think what I would say firstly is kind of echoing the point that Terry made earlier at the very early stages of this crisis, the challenging time that it was, the guidance that was being issued frequently, and that guidance which we followed throughout the course of this has been multi-agency guidance, and our response has been across the health and social care sector.
And that guidance we've continued to review, and the response and the support that we've put in across the care sector has been extensive, as hopefully members have been able to see through a number of documents, and not least our care home assurance plan that was recently endorsed. I think the other point to kind of just flag is that there was no forcing on providers of contractual terms. It's clearly the decision of any provider to be able to accept any admission of any resident. That would be ultimately a decision for that care home. And as I say, we've continued to review the support that we've made available, but must echo that we've never forced any provider to adhere to any contract. Now, what I must reiterate as well is that the support that we've put in place has reflected the guidance, and at no time have we withheld any financial support to any of our care providers. And as the guidance changed, we did that. So from very early start, providers have been paid the additional 10% uplift that Terry identified. They've had advanced payments, and also most recently there's been the payments through the Infection Control Fund. The other point, though, just to flag, although it wasn't a direct question, it was one of your comments there, Mark, around kind of future help, and absolutely recognising the impact that this has had on care providers in terms of their occupancy. Then that is something that we're looking at and having dialogue with providers around that, and recognise that challenge going forward. I think there was one other point that you raised was around the hospital information, and that's something that we're still working on, because it's incredibly complex, because we're not necessarily dealing with one set of information. That's multiple sets of information from different hospital sources. So we're continuing to work on that with our health colleagues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jane. Before I bring Terry and Mark, you want to respond to a certain point. Could you stick to that specific point?
Yeah, just specific. Yes, thank you, Chair. Just specifically on the point of the contracts, and the statement I made about us forcing them to sign. That the point I was trying to make was that the contract itself, if care and nursing home providers wanted the extra funding, they had to sign the contract, and the contract terms required them to accept people who were potentially still infected with COVID from hospitals. That was my point, and it's very clear. I have a copy of the contract in front of me, which I can disseminate to everybody, but is actually out there in the public domain, because many of the care home providers were so upset with this that they actually released it out to people, including the press.
Thanks, Mark. Terry, do you want to make a comment?
Well, I mean, as I said, I'm not here to, kind of get into any political issues or anything like that. But what I would say is, and I say a couple of things as a result of that. At all times during this crisis, the council has followed national guidance at all times. That has been our approach. And, we've done that. So, kind of our approach with regards to what Mark has just said has been similar to other authorities elsewhere in the country. And I'm aware that in the national media over the weekend, it was, I think it was actually the former Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, who mentioned last Friday that 25,000 patients had been released from hospital into care homes. But as I say, the council's approach to this throughout the crisis has been to follow national guidance, so that's where we are. And the second thing is that we've held meetings with Mark. We've had a couple of meetings with Mark and his colleagues, but I wouldn't like to suggest that anything we've done with regard to our policy has been a result of that meeting, because our policy again has been based on the advice that we've received, the guidance that we've received, and we've done that consistently throughout this process. So that is the situation. We've listened to the guidance nationally, and we've adopted that because I think that's an appropriate thing to do, and we're aware that other authorities have done that, done that as well. So I'm sure in the longer term, there'll be a review, kind of what happens to this nationally. But our approach has been to follow the guidance.
Thank you, Terry. You've made that perfectly clear. I've got Councillor Craig Martin next.
Thank you. Councillor Craig Martin, representing North Lodge and Chesley Street. I've got two questions, Chair. Firstly, there's been a lot of discussion about the government's centralised method of responding to COVID. So what actions or responsibilities that the government performed would the corporate management team have preferred that Durham County Council had performed, because we were better placed to carry out the function, of course assuming we'd get the additional money that went with sort of performing that extra function. Secondly, referring to page 33, paragraph 106 in the report, it discusses the absolute fantastic support we as a council have provided to the most needy. But just before we went into lockdown, the settlement grant was cut in half under delegated decisions, and this is a grant that some of the most poorest access when they're the most vulnerable, when they're homeless, fleeing domestic abuse, etc. And firstly, why is this not noted in the report? I'm just a bit concerned that it's been sort of hidden away from county councillors. And why did the cut occur in light of this crisis? Why was the decision not made to temporarily reverse it? Thanks, Chair.
Chair, Chair. I'll take the first one. I'll probably hand the second one over to John Hewitt. I think it's a good question about kind of what the government, what the local authority would like to have seen from government. And I think we're probably going to need, kind of a longer time to actually consider that. But if I give, because I think actually things are still happening. I mean, I think, as I said, there was an announcement, about educational funding. Again, not wanting to be political, but I think there has been a range of announcements throughout the whole of this crisis that actually we've picked up from the media, rather than actually being briefed on and then being prepared for. I think that's been an issue generally. But I'll give you one example. And I'm sure there may well be others, and well, there are others, but I do feel that with things like the school meals, initially there was an issue with school meal provision and how the funding would work with that. And I'm aware that there was an issues with regard to free school meals, and I'm aware that there was an issues with the computer system that was put in place with the access to codes. I'm aware that early on there was the shops that were available to be able to be used as part of that free school meal process. Some of the supermarkets, like I think Waitrose, we don't have any Waitroses in County Durham. We all have a view whether we like one or not, but we don't have one. I think it would have been much easier to passport that cash straight to the authority, straight to John Pearce, and John Pearce could have then arranged for that funding to be received from, for those people who needed those free school meals to receive that funding almost in the same day. Whereas actually many people went weeks, where there was significant delays. And I remember, people listening on a Sunday morning to a head teacher in, I think, Gaines Stanley, who was describing the issues that she was experiencing. And I think it could have been dealt with, that much more quickly, more effectively. And actually we could have responded to that more quickly. I do think generally that, the government need to be aware that the council, as I've already articulated, has its kind of fingers in all the various communities in the county. So if people are looking to do things, whether it be test and trace or whether it be school meals or for example the vulnerable food provision that was provided, we already have those mechanisms. We've already got area action partnerships. We've already got community groups in place. We've already got methods and mechanisms established. So therefore, what we don't need to do is to recreate something else, because that actually just adds another level of bureaucracy and actually keeps local authorities out of the picture. My ask as chief executive is, look, work with local authorities, work directly with local authorities, because we will react when we've been given the money. As we've identified, we've got that money out quickly, and those local businesses have actually benefited from that. So the same applies to test, track and trace, to food provision, to, you know, school meals, wherever it is, work with us and we will deliver, because we have delivered and we will continue to deliver. John?
Thanks, Terry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just coming back to the second point, Councillor Mann, I think it is just important to consider the welfare scheme in its widest sort of context, and I suppose right up front we're not trying to hide anything from members, far be it from me as the Section 151 officer or other people on the call to do that. But I just think it is important to understand the context of what did happen back in February with the wider welfare scheme. I think, Councillor Martin, you've picked on one aspect of it, but there was a wider consideration of how that scheme was operating during last year. There was a significant overspend on the scheme. There was a review undertaken of effectively who was accessing it, what were they accessing it for, and very much trying to bring settlement grants in line with daily living expenses aspect of the scheme. So there was a much wider aspect of the review. So, for example, on daily living expenses, this is the crisis funding that we help people with. So for basic food items, etc. We did increase the limits on that by 20% to reflect some of the feedback we got from people that had used the scheme. And this is for people sort of shopping where they've got real issues getting food. And it fills that gap between people accessing universal credit potentially. And we've now allowed 2 extra roll-on weeks. So there are some very positive changes in the overall scheme. On the settlement grants, we've very much aligned that to the approach on daily living expenses. So we brought that in line in terms of taking a much more flexible approach to taking account of how many people are in a family, for example. So rather than giving everybody the same award, we're now looking much more flexibly at who's accessing the policy, what do they actually need, and then working out their reward based on that basis. And we think that's a fairer way to do that. That's very much, I have to say, in line with what other local authorities do, following the research that we've undertaken. There is flexibility in there. So again, if a family comes along with a significant number of family members, we can flex the award. But it's very much a wider package of changes that have been made to the scheme. And I suppose the other point I would make is what we've also improved is how we engage with partners. And remember, the council's only one partner in the overall approach to welfare assistance. So we've been working, excuse me, much more closely with housing providers, with charities, and there's a much more sort of, shall I call it, wraparound approach to welfare assistance that we've got in place now and going forward. Having said that, given where we are with COVID, we do need to keep this under continuous review. We've been very much in a response phase. We're moving into hopefully recovery shortly. But a lot of those welfare issues won't have gone away, and I'm sure there will be and are further discussions taking place in terms of what the welfare scheme looks like going forward, and the comments that have been made on this call and previously through yourself, Councillor Martin, will be fed into that process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Craig, I can see that you want to come back. I don't want to make this into a game of tennis. If you have a specific point, can you be very brief with it, please?
No problem, Chair. You mentioned that there was a wider review of the benefit system. Like, I don't remember as a county councillor being notified that we were having this wide range review. I just recall seeing the decision to cut this benefit in half by the council. You know, and secondly, just to sort of say that if I note in the report that it says that the number of people accessing the settlement grant were in line with what they were last year. Why wasn't this decision taken in line with the budget process? Why was it a delegated decision made by officers rather than having a conversation with councillors?
Yeah, if I can just come back briefly, Chair. I mean, it is a delegated decision in the Constitution in terms of matching up the welfare assistance scheme to demand, to budget, etc. So that's effectively what's agreed in the Constitution. I think with this one, as previously set out, the decision was made pre-COVID through a delegated decision, and I'll acknowledge there was a delay, given where we were with everything else that was going on with COVID. We'd normally get that messages out to councillors more quickly. We've acknowledged that, and in this particular instance we didn't. So I do acknowledge that, but the decisions were taken in line with the Constitution, Chair.
Thank you, John. I'm sure members will accept that there have been extenuating circumstances. Before we move back to questions, I've got Amanda Healy indicating that she would like to make a comment.
Thanks, Councillor Crute. I just wanted to highlight, building on Terry's first point about kind of where the government has been very centralised. and I think it's highlighted in the report that the testing of residents has been one of those areas. We do have established mechanisms for communicable disease control, working very closely with partners within Public Health England Health Protection Team. And I think what we have found, and which is highlighted in the report, that when we moved from the detect phase of the pandemic into contain, that ability to actually detect and follow up on contacts was lost, and then a centralised system was brought in of testing, which resulted, certainly the Cabinet member raised that with the Secretary of State for Health, which is highlighted in the report. That did also mean where we were trying to put in local solutions with our colleagues in the NHS in terms of a testing programme, that it was kind of undermined at times by the national programme, which include the testing for care homes, as well as announcements that were made. Terry also obviously flagged there that there has been the announcement in the last day about the national app, and that it looks like that the development of that national app will take several months to come into being. So that does mean now we are back at looking at testing people and following up people through the test, traced and isolate, that will be very much focused on our local response, working with the health protection team as we develop those local outbreak plans. But I just wanted to highlight that was highlighted in the report, and it has continued to be the case.
Thank you, Amanda. I have 3 members indicating that they wish to speak, so we'll take those 3 members in turn and we'll move on. So first we've got Amanda Hopgood.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Councillor Hopgood, representing Framalgot Moor, Newton Hall area. Again, I'd like to thank all the corporate management team, the directors. They have gone above and beyond being available to us as group leaders. I had to speak to John Pierce at 10:15 on Sunday night about the school issue. I've spoken to all of them over weekends, and I can't thank them enough for that. The regular meetings we've had has made me as a group leader be able to keep my members informed. I've had regular weekly meetings with them to make sure they were advised. My question today, Rob, is directed at both Alan Patrickson and some things that Terry's said regarding the AAPs. And I really appreciate the money that's been given for the COVID-19. It's been excellent for our communities, but I'm really concerned that members haven't had any input whatsoever in the changes to the rules for the area budgets for the next year for the AAPs. In that, using Terry's phrase, the members are the eyes and ears of our communities. Our communities across the whole county set the priorities for their individual AAPs for the year. And now we've been told that those priorities have been scrapped, and the only thing that AAP budgets can be spent on, not members' budgets, to be clear, AAP budget is COVID recovery. Now, I'm quite happy for COVID recovery to be added as an extra, but to do away with what's important in every community. I'm one of the biggest advocates of AAPs on this council. And the very fact the work is because they're 14 individual ones with 14 individual sets of priorities. And there are some things that we're now not going to be able to fund and support in the next year because that are vitally important to our communities, but because they're not COVID related, we won't be able to do it. Now, I think what we should be doing is we should be adding COVID to the list of priorities, not replacing the priorities with just COVID. So I would like some scrutiny or some member input into this, please, Chair. Thank you.
Alan, would you like to comment on Amanda's concerns?
Yes, thanks, Chair. In setting the priority of COVID recovery as covering all AAP areas, we very much had in mind that the biggest thing that is going to affect everything that we do is what's happened over the last 3 months. But what I would like to emphasise is that by setting that priority, we believe there's a wide range of aspects that will cover. So COVID recovery is not just about social distancing, and it's not just about, in fact, it's not at all about continuing the emergency response. That's what the COVID budget is for. It's really about dealing with what happens after that. So the COVID recovery priority will cover areas like employability, which of course we know that the economy is going to take a huge hit in the second half of this year. And as the furlough scheme comes to an end, that might cause a number of issues there. So it could cover that. It could cover mental health, could cover physical health, as we have to adapt the way we do things in a post-COVID environment. It could cover organisational sustainability for those organisations who've had funding issues because of the way we've had to come through lockdown. Of course, it could cover things like social isolation and those things that we might more readily associate with the response aspect of COVID. But certainly it feels, I think, to the team, and welcome a conversation on this, but it does feel to the team that COVID recovery across the broad aspects of everything that the AAPs already do is going to have such a big impact that needs to be the focus for the rest of the year. But I just want to emphasise that is different from COVID response. So it is not about continuing those emergency response programmes that we've already funded. As I said earlier, we're still looking at that extra funding for that. The recovery is really about the broader aspects of all our communities, the adaptations they'll have to make in a post-COVID environment, and also some of the other impacts of COVID that are coming towards us, be that economic or social.
Thank you, Alan. Do you have a brief supplementary question, Amanda?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Chair. Can you just tell us then, I totally agree with what you're saying, but why haven't we just used COVID recovery as an addition? Why have we chosen to, why, not we, because we haven't been consulted, and that's the whole point. Why have you chosen to use it as a replacement instead of an addition? If what we do is so important in our communities and being close to them is so important, why haven't we just added it? Why have we replaced it?
Alan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether we're playing with the nuance, Amanda. I hope we agree that these are going to be the most important projects that we have across the communities. And I think if there are any projects that come forward through AAPs that you feel need area budget attention, but that somehow aren't fitting into the priority, I'm sure we can have a conversation at AAP level around how that works. But certainly it has to be the most important priority for everyone across the rest of this financial year, certainly in how we adapt to what's happened over the last 3 months.
Thank you, Alan. Terry, do you have a comment?
Yeah, but I think my comment is we're listening to that, and we'll take that away. So you just leave that with us, and we'll have another chat about that.
Okay, thanks Terry, thanks Alan. Hope that answered your question, Amanda. The final two speakers we have first, John Robinson.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor John Robinson, representing Sedgefield and Fishburn, but I'm going to speak in my role as Chair of the Adult Health and Wellbeing Committee. Can I first of all reiterate my feelings exactly what you say about the bereaved, and my whole heart goes with them. And certainly as somebody who's been directly affected, it's not just the loss, it's the effect of your relative being in hospital, dying alone, and the draconian things that happen afterwards with funerals. So I'm so delighted that you and everybody else have considered them. Chairman, I would be remiss not as chair of the committee, and I know Jane Chaplow agrees, thank the sterling and unbelievable work that has been done by the National Health Service, the care sector, the home care sector, and the ambulance service in the county of Durham. They have really pulled the stops out, and I think it would be remiss not to mention them. Can I also thank Jane Robinson and Amanda Healy, who've kept me totally informed around the whole system. And believe me, like Amanda Hopgood said, you think something's gone wrong when you get a phone call at 10 o'clock at night from the Director of Adult Services and your wife believes it's a wind-up. There's a lady on the phone at 10 o'clock. Can I also thank Stephen, our security officer, who has kept us informed, and also Councillor Hovels. Councillor Hobbs has kept me totally involved, including when she wrote to the Health Secretary. So all I'm trying to say, Chairman, is Scrutiny Health were involved. Can I just put some positive slants as well? From my ward, the community hub, with a 1 hour of phoning, a resident had food at her door. It was amazing. She phoned with an hour of food at her door. My community centre, within 2 days of application to John Hewitt for funding, had £10,000 in its bank account to keep it going. And I have a home care service in my community that was on the verge of bankruptcy, but the 10% uplift and the funding up front has kept that business going, and more importantly, has kept people with home care getting their home care. So they are the positive sides, Chairman. There will be mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, and we learn from them, and our future committees will actually consider them. But I do think this morning's meeting is to show the positiveness and thank the people who've done their best to keep the Society of Durham going. My 2 final points, Chairman, are the Local Resilience Forum covers all your committees, all your subcommittees, and I would welcome a report from them what they're going to do in the future in regards to the recovery plan and what role they will have, because I'm sure they will not go. And I would ask Amanda Healy, the government are now talking about local outbreak plans, local health plans. This is firmly going to land in the lap of the local authority. We will take every bit of the work now forward. And I would ask Amanda if she could present in the future a report to either this committee as a whole or the Health Committee on exactly how we are going to do the local outbreak plans. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, John. Amanda, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, Chair. Thank you, and thank you, John. Obviously, we are in the process now of developing those local outbreak control plans, and they will focus on particular key settings where there are some of our vulnerable populations, which continue to include our care settings, responding to school outbreaks. We've heard a little bit about possibly the homeless population. So we're doing that development work now, and we have to present a draft plan by the end of June. There is a plan for a member-led engagement board, which has been agreed that will be the Health and Wellbeing Board. So it would be absolutely delighted to bring a full report either into this meeting or into adults and health scrutiny, John, to ensure that members have that full update in relation to the local outbreak control plan. I think as well at this point it is still really, really important that all of the preventative work that has happened since the beginning of the pandemic response still continues as the restrictions start to lift, because of that preventative work with our local communities, getting those communities on board and supporting the work will actually prevent outbreaks. And that's the main thing that we want to happen. When we do have an outbreak, we want to ensure that we can respond to it with control measures very, very quickly. But that also relies on our local businesses, our schools, and most importantly, our communities to do that with us. So I'm more than happy to bring a much more detailed report, and we'll have that plan, which will be published by the end of June.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks for that commitment, Amanda. Thanks for your question, John. Terry, your hand's raised. Would you wish to comment?
Yeah, Chair, it's just I think we're happy to provide that report. I mean, I thank you for your comments, John, and your support throughout the emergency, which is really appreciated, and the regular contact that you've had with ourselves, and where that you're absolutely on top of what we're doing. But what I would say with the LRF is that the LRF is changing. The LRF was meeting daily, including weekends initially when we first went through the crisis. It's now, in recent weeks, been meeting twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And as from the 30th of June, it's going to be changing. So I'm going to be chairing the LRF group as from the 30th of June, and we're going to be focusing just on recovery. And what we've got around the table, we're changing the people around the table, and we're going to have strategic conversations around the economy, our recovery plans and so forth, and building on the work that Jeff Paul has been doing within the organisation, and Amy Harhoff will be doing as well when she starts on Monday. And then we'll be, as I say, looking at how we have that helicopter view of the county, and how do we then protect our businesses. Before we went into COVID, we're in quite a decent place as a county. We need to ensure that as we come out of COVID, or as we deal with the next phase of COVID, that we protect our assets and also where there are potential problems, that we are there for our people and that we're putting support in place. So welcome the opportunity to have a conversation about that in the future.
Okay, thanks, Terry. Fraser Tinsley would have been the very last speaker, but I've been told that Patricia Joplin wants to speak as well. So we're going to take Fraser first, then we'll move on to Patricia, then we really must move on because time's against us. Fraser?
Okay, thank you, Chair. My question is about the whole issue of coordination. I think one of the real success stories, if you can have such a thing in a crisis like this, is the coordination and the partnership working that's occurred across the county. But I think there are many more questions about the partnership working that's occurred between central government and local government. Now, if you sat in the main street in Wellington or in one of our local primary schools as a governor, it can seem a long way from decisions that are made in Whitehall to the effect of that's having on the ground. We've seen examples of this recently in the last weeks around social distance and obviously the skills issue, as I said a few weeks ago. But I suppose my question is that really as we go forward through this process, because we're going to be dealing with COVID for a long time, are the government offering any mechanism for local authorities such as ourselves to provide feedback to them about how their decisions are impacting on the ground, so they can learn lessons in terms of how they communicate with us and how they take us forward as a country? One of the things that occurs to me, I've had this from numerous people, even locally, is the issue around guidance. And is this causing problems to the local authority? Guidance, it's ambiguous in terms of what it actually means. Do you take it to the letter, or is there actually flexibility in it? Because that ambiguity is causing problems for people. And I'd just like to ask, is that an issue that we've had to deal with, and the whole issue of interpreting, which shouldn't be the case in such a crisis like this? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Fraser. I think that's one for you, Terry.
Yeah, it's quite a big issue. I mean, what I would say is, I think Richard Bell's on the phone on the call. I think Richard has been incredibly helpful in passage, trying to get our messages raised nationally. But we've had representation. The council, is on regular calls with the local government association. It's on, and also the association, the county council chief executives, and the county council network. So what we've been trying to do is to raise our concerns through those mechanisms, and also in areas like Councillor Hennig, leader of the council, wrote a letter on behalf of ANIC, the Association of North East Councils. So we've been providing our concerns, our issues through those forums. There hasn't been direct communication, and there have been calls with government ministers that we can actually dial into something like this, but it's more a case of listening rather than kind of challenging or having a discussion. Sometimes on those calls, you can actually enter questions, or seeing questions being entered, but actually perhaps some of the more difficult questions, sometimes they haven't been answered. So I think that issue of engagement with local authorities is problematic. I think one of the biggest problems we've found, and I know we continue to find, is that guidance will come out, information will come out, and particularly during the early days, there were announcements being made, particularly during the 5 p.m. press conferences, that we had little or no knowledge about. And of course, once they're made, people just assume that the council, have the information, have the guidance, are ready to go, are ready to react, and we'll deal with it. I can give you a couple of examples of that. The business grants that it took a while to receive, and that businesses were clearly struggling and clearly needed that money, and it could almost look like the local authorities were being inefficient, by not getting that money to them, but we haven't received the cash. And care homes was another one where it took quite a while to get that money to us. So it really, I think communication is an issue with regard to what it's like on the ground compared to what it feels like centrally. But also, I think that the big issue for me as chief executive and from my team would all say that when when announcements are made, really there should be guidance that is actually behind that allows us to actually deal with the issues and respond. Because every time there's a communication, you can imagine the amount of emails like John Hewitt received from businesses saying, right, we've heard this now, where's the money? How do we apply for it? And we never had anything in place. So then we'd have to basically develop, guidance or wait for the guidance to come through, because obviously we can't spend government money without adhering to guidance. Otherwise, we find ourselves with a fiscal problem with that. And John has a responsibility in his 151 officer role to ensure that it's in place. So then we wait for the information to come through, then set up our systems, and then try and move really quickly. So that's been incredibly frustrating throughout this process. Although, to be fair, as I say, whenever we've had issues, we've raised them with the MPs and raised them with, with Richard's help, tried to get the messages up to government to make them aware of that. But that continues to be an issue. And as I say, on this call this morning, it's mentioned about the additional money to, for head teachers and, for schools. Well, as chief executive, I've just been checking my emails and, waiting for information on that. And, people will assume that I'm fully briefed. I'm fully aware that John Pearce has been briefed and that he can get something out to head teachers. And often it's just absolutely not the case. But I know John's got his hand up as well.
Yes, John, do you want to come in on that?
Hey, yeah, if I could just come in on that. So, I mean, we do have a number of mechanisms to have those conversations with central government. So through our professional network, through the Association of Directors of Children's Services, we have regular weekly discussions. So both regionally and nationally, there are regular weekly discussions with the department, and information is shared, but it is limited. So, for example, we had a call with the regional leads on Wednesday. We knew there was an announcement coming today, but we didn't know what the announcement was going to be. And at the moment, I have as much information as you do around the sort of detail of that. I mean, we welcome the announcement and the investment, but we don't have the detail that goes with that. So there is a line of communication and an opportunity for us to make our voices very clear, which we do on a regular basis, and provide advice and guidance, some of which is picked up and some of which isn't. But the scale and level of guidance coming through and the timeliness of that has been a huge challenge, as Terry said, all the way through. I could certainly speak in terms of the guidance for schools, which is often followed sort of well behind the announcements. And, quite rightly, our school leaders expect the council to be providing guidance, to be able to answer questions, and we often haven't been able to do that. So that has been a challenge. But there are routes to raise those concerns, and quite often when we do raise those concerns, we do get answers. So yes, there are communication channels in place, but they could certainly work a lot more effectively, I think, is probably the answer to it.
Thanks for that contribution, John. I have Patricia Joplin indicating that she would like to speak, and this will be the last speaker on this item. Are you there, Patricia?
Yes, thank you, I am. I just also like to reiterate, from Crookward, sorry. I'd like to reiterate the condolences that we've all said for the families that have lost loved ones. I too had an extremely narrow escape with a very close relative and know exactly the anxiety that we all go through. The thing I'd like to speak about is the business grant that went out earlier on. I congratulate the council for the speed at which these grants went out, and it was only late last week that I was speaking to shop owners and I was rather amazed at a couple of them who had the grant but were open right the way through the COVID and were actually busier than they were normally. And they were saying, I didn't need this grant. I've got £10,000. And my question is, was the government guidelines just a blanket? Let's give everybody, every small business this money and every business this money? Or how did we sort of judge whether they actually needed this money? Because I know of three businesses, I'm obviously not going to mention names, that had money that really didn't need that money.
Thanks, Patricia. I've heard anecdotes from around the country about similar issues. Does anyone have an answer, John?
Yeah, Chair, if I can come in on that. It relates back to the point Terry was making earlier on the business grants. The guidance was very prescriptive from government, and it wasn't necessarily looking at individual need in the way you've described it, Councillor Joplin. It was very much based on the level of business rates that were paid. It was based on the type of business. So it was quite a high level set of principles that we had to apply as the local authority, but it was very much business rates driven in the first instance. So there was no sort of taking account of the local circumstances around particular businesses to the level that you've set out. But we have followed the government guidance to the letter in terms of that scheme. The latest scheme that we've just announced has a little bit more discretion in it, but again, the majority of that scheme will be taken up through following the government guidance, even on the more local scheme that we've got going forward. But again, it's predominantly based on the information that the government have put out, but certainly not going down to the very local level circumstances that you've outlined. So it's very much based on a national scheme.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Thanks for your question, Patricia. We have nobody else indicating that they wish to speak, so we'll go to the recommendation in the report. And the recommendation on the papers for the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Management Board are to consider the contents of this report, but I'd also like to add, as Chair of the Management Board, and to echo the recommendations made by the Cabinet, that we acknowledge the immense contribution local communities have made to the response and the cooperation of County Durham residents throughout this unprecedented situation, and also to acknowledge the contribution the Council's employees and strategic partners have made to the response. Are we happy to agree with that recommendation?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
Agreed,
Right,
Chair.
thank you, everyone.
Agreed.
Right, we now go to item 6 on the agenda, which is the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Management Board Refresh of Work Programme for 2020-2021, report of the Corporate Director of Resources, and we have Jenny Howarth to present the report.
Chair, before I begin, there's just been a further RTS come through from Councillor Wilkes.
Yes, Mark, do you want to raise a point?
So a bit quick off the mark. It's relating to this, so I'll wait until Jenny's brought the report forward. It's related to this particular item.
Okay, Mark, thanks. Jenny?
Thanks, Chair. This is the usual report that the committee receive to update your work programme annually. The executive summary of the report highlights that, as always, the draft work programme is designed to be flexible to accommodate items that may arise throughout the year. But this is particularly important this year in view of the changing landscape we currently face. We've therefore framed the work programme in the context of both COVID-19 as well as the ongoing County Durham vision for 2035. I'd like to draw members' attention particularly to paragraphs 7 and 8 in the report, which highlight the adaptation of the scrutiny function to meeting virtually in this format for the foreseeable future. To assist with this approach, we propose to keep the agendas short to enable virtual meeting time to be focused on those matters which are the highest priority. The draft work programme therefore proposes that some of the regular overview reports will instead be circulated by email for information and comment, so that the virtual meetings can be focused and allow adequate time for the core items for scrutiny. The proposed work programme has been informed by a range of background information, which is highlighted at paragraphs 11 and 12 of the report. In terms of the work programme itself, which is at Appendix 2 to the report, key work programme items proposed include scrutiny of the MTFP process, which will be even more important this year given the ongoing impact of COVID-19. Also scrutiny of the ongoing transformation of the council and some of the smarter working practices that are proving so vital and have accelerated in our pandemic response. The work programme also proposes that key overview items on the regulation of investigatory powers, performance and budget continue to be reported in virtual meetings. Chair, the committee are asked to receive, comment on and agree the proposed work programme in this context.
Chair, we seem to have a little bit of a technical issue. Could we just suspend the meeting for a few seconds?
Yes, I've just noticed that, Jackie. I think we should. Right, I think we're back in the room. Jenny had just finished her report on item 6 in relation to the refresh of the Management Board work programme for the next year. Mark Wilkes had indicated that he wished to contribute. Mark?
Thank you, Chair, and I'm very pleased at Jenny's suggestion of emailing some reports to reduce the length of some of our meetings, and perhaps that should actually continue when we finally do return to County Hall, wherever that might actually end up being. Just in terms of on page 69, the budget and MTFP process, it's identified as running from the 17th of December to the 22nd of January to enable scrutiny members to comment and feed into the budget setting process. And every year we find ourselves struggling to know what funding the government is going to actually give us. And this year it's going to be even more critical. And the government needs to make sure that we're given such funding, the information and the details far earlier than normal. So while the senior officers are here, could I just emphasise the need for us to start lobbying the government now to make sure that we don't end up with finding out in January again what money we're going to have next financial year. But to follow on from that, in relation to our actual scrutiny of the budget, because the 17th of December is so close to Christmas and then we shut down for several weeks, it strikes me that there isn't sufficient time there to be scrutinising the whole budget. And I wonder whether we can look at what elements of it can be brought forward, perhaps to November, so that we've got time to start looking at things now, especially this year when things are so critical. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mark. I think your point on the timing of the fund and settlements quite valid, because we have been in a situation where we're getting indicative allocations as late as Christmas Eve, and clearly that doesn't help anyone. John, do you have any comments on Mark's concerns?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Wilkes. Just to give some assurance to members on the call, we have been lobbying and we are continuing to lobby around an early settlement date, because obviously it's very difficult to plan, particularly so at the minute if we don't have that. We can give some the challenge we've got with the budget. It's difficult to do it in separate chunks, Councillor Wilkes, so it's sometimes difficult to present different parts of the budget if it's not all sort of joined up in terms of the funding and the expenditure and the income. And I'm certainly happy to have a chat with the Chair around whether there's anything we can do in advance of that date, but I think a lot of it will be dependent on what we get from the government. But happy to talk to the Chair and see if there's anything else we can do.
Thanks, John, and Mark will take those comments on board. I've got Craig Martin indicating he wishes to speak.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, is there going to be any opportunity to scrutinise the county plan? I know we're coming to the sort of final stages now, and I know it needs to go to full council first to get approval or be disapproved. But will our committee be looking at the processes and just go through it and review this sort of how it's come about? Because it's been going on for a very long time, and it's probably worth us to scrutinise the processes that pulled it all together.
We'll have to see which way the land lies on that one, Craig. If you remember last time, I believe it was the Economy and Enterprise Overview and Scrutiny Committee that led on that. But the scrutiny sessions were open to all scrutiny members. I don't know if any members, any officers have a comment on that one.
Chair, you've got Stephen Gwilym with his hand up.
Yes, I've just noticed, Jenny. Thanks, Stephen.
Chair, just to confirm, as part of the development of the work programme for economy and enterprise, we have been looking at exactly that issue. We're conscious that we are awaiting the finalised report to allow for the scrutiny of the County Durham Plan prep to recommence. We've got it planned, and it will be tabled as part of those work programme discussions to the Economy and Enterprise Committee that has been rescheduled to the 23rd of July. And additionally, as in previous meetings, those discussions and that opportunity for engagement with members will be across all of the council members, Chair. It's not just restricted to that committee. Thank you.
That's exactly as I thought, so thanks for confirming that, Stephen. I don't have anybody else indicating that they wish to speak, so are we happy to go to the recommendation on item 6, which is to receive and comment on the proposed Management Board work programme for 2021 and agree the work programme for 2021 is attached and the flexibility it offers to respond in emergent issues. Can we agree that? If you dissent, would you please indicate?
Agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
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 Okay, thank you for that. We'll go straight to item 7, which is extension of appointment on statutory non-voting overview and scrutiny co-optees, the report of the Corporate Director of Resources. And we'll go back to Stephen Gwilym for this one.
Thank you, Chair. Stephen Gwilym, Principal Overview and Scrutiny Officer, and I'm here to present the report which advises the Board of the use of Chief Officer delegation provisions to extend the terms of office of our existing non-statutory, non-voting co-optees for a further 2 years up to May 2022. Members will be aware that each of our thematic scrutiny committees can appoint up to 2 non-statutory, non-voting co-optees, and those appointments were made in May 2018 for a period of 2 years. The current appointments ended in May 2020, or were due to end in May 2020, hence the need to approach and utilise Chief Officer delegations to enable the extension of those terms of office for a further 2-year period. We would normally bring a report to Management Board to agree to that proposal, but obviously with the COVID-19 outbreak, we were unable to do that. We have contacted all of our co-optees who are prepared to serve for a further 2 years, and at the cessation of that period, we do intend to undertake a full review of co-optee membership, which will involve the utilisation of the normal appointments process and interview process, with the involvement of elected members at that point in time, Chair. So the recommendation of the report is to note the use of that delegated power to extend those terms of office for a further 2 years and agree to the full review of non-statutory, non-voting co-optee membership to be undertaken in 2022, Chair. Take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Stephen. We've been guided by necessity on this particular issue, and I think we're fortunate in having very strong, proactive co-optees on each of the committees. So personally, I'm happy to go ahead with that, but I noticed that Amanda Hopgood has indicated she would like to speak.
Yeah, Chair, it was just to reiterate what you said. I think it makes absolute sense, and I would move the recommendation.
Thank you, Amanda. Have nobody else wishing that to indicate that they would like to speak, so are we happy to agree that report on the recommendation is read out by Stephen?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Right, thank you. That takes us to item 8, notice of key decisions, report of the head of legal and democratic services. We go back to Jenny Howarth for this report.
Thanks, Chair. The schedule attached covers those decisions that are scheduled to be considered by Cabinet from the 8th of July 2020. New to the plan this time is the MTFP 11, the proposal to close the Trimdon Grange site of Bluebell Meadow Primary School, and the proposal to amalgamate Oxclose Primary and Oxclose Nursery Schools into a single primary school, Chair. So the report is for members to note.
Yes, normally for information only, but I noticed that Mark wants to make a point, Mark.
It's just a very quick one. I notice obviously on the report it doesn't mention anything in relation to the leisure centre transformation, because that was a previous decision that was made, but there are subsequent decisions that do need to be made in relation to that. And obviously at the moment all of the leisure centres are closed and we have no indication as to when they'll reopen. So I'm just wondering whether we can get any clarification while the senior officers are here as to where they see those kind of projects, and not just the leisure centre changes, because there's a huge amount, £50 million of investment there to regenerate our leisure centres, but there's lots of other schemes as well where decisions have been made, and we don't know as councillors what the feeling is as to when those projects will start to occur on the ground in terms of the actual work. And there may well be some work that should be running now and being done now that we're coming out of lockdown before, for example, our leisure centres are actually reopened, that it would be better to do it now to avoid delaying down the line the opening of such facilities. Thanks.
Terry, do you have a comment to make on the process?
Yeah, Chair, what I would just say to that is, I think it's a good point Mark makes, but we're just coming out of the peak of the emergency, and we've just had a new head of culture, sport and tourism start, and we've got Amy Harhoff starting on Monday. And clearly Jeff's been doing a lot of work on this, but we've been all hands on deck in dealing with emergency. So I'm aware that the groups that have have been meeting recently, just recently, to take that forward. But I think Mark, you'd have to just bear with us for a little while we kind of get back to where we were with regard to this. We're as eager and keen to get this moving as anybody else, but the world has been upside down for few months, and we need just to reset ourselves, and we'll be back with some information as soon as we possibly can do. But clearly, when we took reports to Cabinet previously, we did so on the basis that we weren't expecting what's happened, but now it has happened. We need just to just make sure that everything's that needs to be in place is in place, but we're gradually returning to where we need to be.
Mark, this is normally for information, so I'm stretching it I'll bring you back in if it's a brief comment.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with Terry that there's so much going on. I'm just acutely aware of the fact that we get an awful lot of income coming in from a lot of the things that we actually provide to the public, and it does concern me that things like leisure centres will end up being shut down and then shut down again in order to carry out these major works. And trying to find some way of getting some of this work done more quickly would definitely be advantageous to the council from a financial point of view, but also to the general public in terms of getting those facilities back open for them. Thanks, Chair.
Jeff, Paul, you indicate you wish to speak?
Thanks, Chair. Just very quickly, I know Councillor Wilkes emailed me earlier in the week about this very issue, and I think we're trying to arrange a meeting over the next week or so to discuss it. But in terms of just following up from Terry, the target is to bring an update report on the whole leisure centre, leisure services transformation project to the September Cabinet.
Right, thanks for that clarification, Jeff. That item was for information only, but are we happy to recommend that we note the report on the notice of key decisions? That takes us to the last item on the agenda, which is item 9, any other business. I haven't been informed of any other business, and that concludes the meeting. So thank you all for participating in the first virtual corporate overview and scrutiny management board meeting. Until we meet again, please look after yourselves and take care. I'll see you all soon. Ta-ra.
Thank you.